Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And may I take this opportunity to congratulate you on your recent appointment. The responsibility to maintain decorum and enforce the rules in this, the People's House, is a significant one that serves as a guidepost to the topic about which I rise today, gender-based violence. Today, I'm asking all of us to reflect on the social norms that contribute to gender-based violence and to ask ourselves, what can we do as legislators and as individuals to change those norms to keep women safe? Last week, on December 10th, Human Rights Day, we marked the end of 16 days of activism against gender-based violence for this year. And it's been an annual event ever since 1991. But has the world become safer for women and girls in the last 30 years? No, not according to Secretary General of the United Nations. And I quote, "As the world retreated into homes due to the lockdown measures introduced to curb the COVID-19 pandemic, reports showed an alarming increase in the already existing pandemic of violence against women. Accompanying the crisis has been a spike in domestic violence at exactly the time that services, including rule of law, health and shelters, are being diverted to address the pandemic. Even before COVID-19, 1 out of 3 women worldwide were experiencing physical or sexual violence, mostly from intimate partners." Now, some of us may be thinking, well, of course women in war-torn countries are more vulnerable. Women living under conditions of societal collapse are vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, gender-based violence is a shadow pandemic right here in British Columbia. Let me share some shocking statistics. More than half the women in BC over the age of 16 have experienced physical or sexual violence. That's more than 1 million women. In BC, there are more than 1,000 physical or sexual assaults against women every week. Women are more than 7 times more likely to report sexual assaults than men, and the most vulnerable are young women. Indigenous women are 3.5 times more likely than non-Indigenous women to experience violence, and the homicide rate is 7 times higher. LGBTQ individuals are more than 2 times more likely to be a victim of violence. More than half of transgendered people have experienced intimate partner violence, and nearly half of transgendered people have been sexually assaulted in their lifetime. Mr. Speaker, British Columbians are not immune to gender-based violence. It's not something we can prevent by closing our borders or by simply staying home. And like that other pandemic, we need to be careful about our own behaviour and attitudes to make sure we are not super spreaders. Mr. Speaker, gender-based violence continues to be incubated right here in British Columbia in the medium of cultural norms that are pervasive, insidious, and largely invisible. And because my time is limited, I'll refer to this complex matrix of carriers simply as toxic masculinity. The notion that a man must compete aggressively and dominate others. The notion that a man must repress his emotions, all emotions that is, except for anger. And women are not immune. Who knows that better than women like us in this chamber, trying to make it in a man's world? How many of us have been told to be more aggressive, to develop a thick skin, to be praised and rewarded for crushing our opposition, advised to keep our feelings to ourselves? And how often have we complied? We function in an intensely competitive environment. It is also an environment of privilege. So while we may suffer embarrassment on occasion, we are protected from physical harm. And we have a speaker with vast powers to defend our dignity. Not so our sisters who live their lives outside this institution. I'm proud of the steps we've taken already to combat gender-based violence. For example, We've allocated $734 million over the next 10 years to build 1,500 new transition homes, including new housing options in remote and First Nations communities. We've provided $10 million to the Ending Violence Association of BC to support emergency sexual assault services. We've launched a province-wide campaign to prevent sexualized violence and misconduct on public post-secondary campuses. We introduced paid leave for workers escaping domestic or sexual violence. We contributed $2 million to the Moosehide campaign that engages K-12 students now to prevent violence against women and girls in the future. We increased cell phone coverage along the Highway of Tears. Yes, Mr. Speaker, I am proud of these initiatives, just as I'm proud of the people of British Columbia for their leadership in curbing the spread of COVID-19. But in both cases, increasing numbers of cases demonstrate that more needs to be done. Thankfully, a vaccine is on its way to stop COVID in its tracks. But what is the vaccine that will stop gender-based violence? How can we inoculate our society from a cultural virus of toxic masculinity that puts so many lives at risk? That, Mr. Speaker, is the fundamental question. Thank you.
Thank you, member. The chair recognizes the member for